That's probably one of the most comforting things is that, I'm judging myself that way in a way that God never did in that moment,
Mm.
that
Yeah.
God loved me into moving forward. And I also, had to own the fact that being a career counselor is a wonderful way to tell other people what they should do without having to deal with any of your own stuff.
Yeah, the worst people are career coaches, right? Or life coaches. They got
Right,
you can't
exactly.
can't do, might as well teach.
Right. Yeah, my life is shambles, but I know exactly what you should be doing.
Tito, you remember Novitiate,
I do. I was
the
just
frozen
reminiscing about
tundra of Wisconsin,
it. Oh yeah.
the
Oh
many
yeah.
days below zero,
I
the
think
dark winters.
I think it snowed in November, and we didn't see the ground again until April.
Yeah, there was actually a car that they put on the ice, and they bet on how long it would take for it to fall through the water into
Yep.
the bottom. I
Yep.
remember it very, very much like The Shining, right?
Yeah.
70 rooms in that house, the dark winters, everyone
I
going
think we
crazy.
watched. I think we watched two versions of The Shining while we were there.
Yeah, I did not. I said that I'm living it. Do you remember also that we couldn't have cell phones and there was no internet access?
That's
We had
right.
to talk to each other.
That's right. We had to use public
Yeah.
computers.
Novitiate was a great time. I think it formed me as a human being, and I think it's so important that guys go through that same experience, don't you?
I really do. I think that trial, that learning to disconnect is really important.
Yeah. So with that in mind, let's welcome our novice, Jimmy, who's living in Santa Barbara right now, who is currently on the internet. Jimmy, welcome from the Novitiate. Quite a different experience than ours, I have to say, in sunny, beautiful California. What's it been like? You've been a novice for a couple months now.
It's been good. It's been different. I cannot relate to the ice and snow. I've been surfing many times since I've been here.
Okay.
Oh,
So it's a very, I mean, the water's cold, but I wouldn't describe it as icy.
Sounds like a very different
Um,
experience.
yes.
I think so. Yeah, we certainly have had limited technology and some of the things you guys talked about, but like in all scenarios, the younger generation has it easier.
Yes. I would say we walked uphill both ways, but Wisconsin's about as flat as you can get, and Santa Barbara actually has hills, so I
Yeah.
might lose that one.
Yeah. Well, at
But
least it was
in
in the
my
snow.
day, yeah.
Well, we actually had really serious conversations about this, even during our time, because I remember Casey and I talked about how letter writing was acceptable because it had always been acceptable, but emailing wasn't acceptable. We're like, well, isn't emailing just modern day letter writing? You
Much
know?
more efficient. It's better for the environment.
Yeah, and so what was fascinating about that is like, okay, 50 years ago, you guys were allowed to write a letter, not email, but email didn't exist when you guys were novices. It does now. So yeah, it actually ended up being really interesting for a lot of conversations like that about, okay, what is worth adjusting and what is worth holding on to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the cell phone piece has been part of that conversation
Hmm.
because it's like we don't have it for a period of, I think, 4 months when we first get here. But some of the conversations around it have seemed to be, well, you're going to have it after.
Yeah.
When you're working and doing ministry and living your life, cell phones are a part of modern life. So how do you structure that in a way where you divest from it?
Hmm.
You change your attachment or relationship to it, but you also acknowledge you're going to have to change that moving forward by reintegrating that into how you use it. So it's been a weird but good experience, I
Sure.
think, trying to figure that out.
I will fully admit that my opinion has changed on this multiple times, even in this conversation, as I've thought about this. Because during my novitiate, I thought it was ridiculous that we gave up our cell phones, and then at the end of the year, we were giving back our cell phones, and everyone sat in the rec room on their phones and didn't learn anything. And I was like, well, this didn't work. But at the same time, I kind of cherished that year. And now when I think how tethered I am to my phone and how addicted so many people are, I'm reminded of St. Paul, who before he went preaching, he went 3 years just to learn and to separate and to be set apart. There's something to that. And I do, we start this off in a funny way, complaining about our novitiates, which I think is the rite of passage. You will get to do that now with a generation after you. But there's something so beautiful and reminiscent about it. We're like, that was a great year without having to have my phone. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, it does. I think something, Casey, you and I had talked about this several times over the years. Something that you had said one time, which I thought actually was a really good insight, is getting.
Why say actually?
Sorry, let me drop that. Something you said actually this time, rarely, was really good insight.
Okay.
I doubled down. Sorry. Was that getting rid of the phone entirely didn't teach us good habits, and that was, I thought, a valid point, because I was fine with having gotten rid of the phone, because I actually got rid of it during postulancy. So from the moment I'd been a postulant, I already didn't have a phone anymore. But then getting a phone back, you're right, it doesn't teach you good habits. I think having sort of ground rules of saying these are the times when we'll have our phones on us and we'll be available, and these are the times where we won't, is a really good practice to have, and to think about it in a way that it's something you can carry on after you've left novitiate.
And if I remember correctly, you didn't get a phone for 3 years after novitiate because you never returned a call or texted me back. That must have been the reason.
I didn't get a phone my first year out of novitiate. I was like, this is the thing about me, because people see me on my phone all the time, and they're like, Tito would die without his phone. Honestly, like, I use it all the time because it's there and it's distracting. The minute my phone is gone, I'm like, okay, I'm over it. So I have no self-control when I have it, and when I don't have it, I don't care.
The thing that's so alarming, especially in Santa Barbara, because we do have free time, so I'm often out walking or trying to get to the beach or riding my bike or something. And it's alarming how beautiful it is here and how many people walk while texting or scrolling. You know? And when it's taken away, I don't think I was very addicted to my phone before, but taking it away, it shows it in a totally, it highlights it almost more than it did before, where it's like, texting and walking is dangerous. And I see people do it constantly here.
It is interesting, and that's like a silly example of, I think, what religious life does, where you start to change your life a little bit, and you do start to look around the world really, really differently. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most obvious things is like sex and sexuality, and like how out there everyone is, and how that's what everyone's thinking about all the time. And I'm not going to say we turn into robots once we become friars, but there's a part of us that's like, that's not my highest priority anymore. Mm-hmm. I've turned from that life a little bit. And you start to kind of like, what is wrong with our world? Mm-hmm. People's addiction to money, power, these things just become kind of strange to us. And as St. Francis said in his testament, what was bitter has become sweet, and kind of vice versa. You enter this life and you're like, I never saw this world in quite the same way.
Yeah, I think about the fact that, when I joined, I had very strong opinions about, politics.
When you joined.
Yes, okay. But specifically about politics.
We're talking about changes here, conversions.
Economics. I'll get there.
Okay.
And, one of them was I was like, yeah, staunch capitalism, all this kind of stuff. And, now having lived, as a friar, where we hold all things in common. But then I look at the gospel and it says, sell everything you have, give your money to the poor, and follow me. I'm like, ooh, that's not really capitalism, and that's something we're all called to. It's something that the early church tried to live. And so that's where I look at my beliefs and my perspectives. And I'm not saying people have to have my perspective. Like, capitalism's fine, but that's just an example of how my perspective changed very drastically, at least as it relates to money and economics.
One of the big changes that I think has happened for me this year is we received the habit at the end of our divestiture period. Mm-hmm. And so I'm still getting used to wearing it and
Sure.
And what that feels like. I do ministry once a week at the Cottage Hospital here in Santa Barbara. But a very big difference that I feel wearing the habit, besides wearing the habit and being part of the Franciscans in a public way, is that I wear the institutions that I claim to belong to on my person. And I think that's one thing that's very difficult to talk about in the United States is what's our relationship to institutions. Mm-hmm. And so it's been I've had really positive and some negative experiences wearing the habit, but it's been a real learning lesson of like, oh, I say I believe this, but now people can see it without ever talking to me. And it changes interactions that I might have if I'm in street clothes.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about sex, greed, money, all that stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
individuality might be the thing that's the most countercultural. And you talk about institutions, like you're taking on a collective identity, you're taking on someone else's sins and mistakes and all the baggage that comes with the church. You are, I assume, Gen Z. How old are you?
31. So
31,
I
not
think I'm
quite. Okay, so you're
sneaking
right
in.
on the
Yeah,
cusp. Okay,
yeah.
yeah. But I, more early 20s, and I work with the college students and the high schoolers. Man, they don't want to be associated with an institution. There's so much distrust.
Yep.
It's not all about me, but it is. I got to kind of protect my own identity and curate my identity, and that's something I think we really push back against in a beautiful way, which is I am my brother's keeper, and we're in this together.
I think there's something that we live out that the younger generation wants but doesn't know how to get, and that is, that chosen tribe kind of effect. Like a lot of the younger generation, they want that's part of the, or at least it was part of the discourse. This is my tribe, these are my people, right? This is my chosen family, and we did that. Yes, we are part of an institution, the Catholic Church, but we're also part of this religious order within the Catholic Church, and we've said, not only, do I feel called to this, I've chosen it, I've chosen to say yes to it, and they've chosen me, and we've taken vows to dedicate our life to it. It's a really profound thing that I think a lot of people are looking for, but it's also very intimidating.
Yeah, so talk about that. You are in novitiate preparing for vows. So you're not in vows yet. What does that word mean to you? You're gonna take vows someday.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we talk about and it's on my mind, and then I'll get caught up in other things and kind of get away from it because on some level we're living in the novitiate within the framework of the vows without having taken the vows in a
Right.
sense.
Sure.
If I wasn't living the vows in novitiate, I probably would not still be in novitiate to a certain extent.
We would hope not. Yes, there's some
Yes,
sort
yes,
of process.
right. So I think but the idea I think is growing in terms of the vows really being a gift. We had a friar, Andre Serino, come in and teach a class on Saint Bonaventure, and he said something to the effect of, you know, if the vows aren't a gift to you, leave. Because they are a
Wow.
gift.
Yeah.
They should be something that allows you to be free to follow where God's calling in your life and to go there. And that's a gift. It's a gift to be able to live and move and breathe in that way. Um, it doesn't mean it doesn't require spiritual and personal discipline, but if it's all transactional in the sense I give up this to get that, it seems that I'd be missing the point. And so right now that's intellectual, and I hope in the remaining time in novitiate it becomes more experiential.
Well, it's so true because I think our world sees vows as binding. I take a vow of chastity, therefore I can't get married. I take a vow of poverty, therefore I can't get rich. But as you say, it's freeing. It opens you up to do so many other things. Have you found that even though you're not in vows, you're living that life, the last 2 years, something opened up inside you? Say, wow, I've never felt so free.
I think one of the freedoms has been uh, intimacy with people in ministry. And I think intimacy is often described in simply a romantic sense. Um, but I've had a real, graced moments of intimacy with people that I visited in the hospital, especially this year. Me and one other novice here, Ricky, spent some time with family members of a woman who had passed away that morning. And it's like the privilege to be able to walk into a space where someone's grieving and experiencing a tremendous loss and hold their hand and just try to be love in the room. You don't even necessarily need to say anything, but just to be love and to say that we're here, whatever you need. We offer prayers, we offer some type of um, spiritual place in that room. Um, but yeah, so moments like that, I think, if I was off doing something else, I just wouldn't be able to be in that space the way I am right now. And so I find that to be a real gift.
It definitely
Wow, that's
is.
amazing.
And you were talking briefly about the habit. I'll say this: when we first received the habit, even leaving novitiate, that first year of simple vows, I think I wore my habit, I'll say 50% of the time, like if I was doing ministry, if I was going to class, I was wearing my habit. Outside of that, I was almost never in my habit. And now I think I'm in my habit 95% of the time, and it's just, and it's different for everyone. And I know that different friars wear it different amounts for different purposes. But to me, it now feels like, a second skin. And one, I behave better with it on.
And we're all thankful for that.
Yes.
Habited Tito.
But two, it allows me to engage with the world. When I first got it, I was very self-conscious about the world looking at me. You'd walk down the street and people would stare, because there was a time where they knew friars, but that time has passed. And so I was just sort of this odd thing. And now I see that as an opportunity. And so it's you're entering into this life, and you're going to be experiencing these things. And I guess I'm just saying, be open to how you feel it changing you, and see if it does kind of feel liberating, because that's how I have felt about it. The habit, which I was very self-conscious about before, I have found it very liberating since then.
Yeah, we talked about it before, just interpersonal skills or lack thereof. I mean, Tito's very good at making friends. I tend to just kind of hide away sometimes. I can be very gregarious and very extroverted if I know my place and I feel comfortable. But, me in street clothes talking to strangers, like, no, I'm just going to hang out here. But as Tito said, when people are looking at you already, you might as well say hello. And so for me, it's drawn me out of myself. It makes me more extroverted, kind of who I really want to be. And I think that's a beautiful image of what religious life should be, is it doesn't form you into something different. It draws you out who God created you to be, at least in ideal senses. That's what it does.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I'm naturally very extroverted. I'm the type of person that if I went to a party with friends, they're dreading me saying goodbye because it takes forever. um, so I feel very comfortable, talking to total strangers in a line somewhere. But I had an experience earlier this year wearing my habit where, again, I was at the hospital. I swear I have other stories in my life besides the hospital, but it's
we
most
know
recently
Novitiate is
on my
limited.
mind.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, my worldview has totally changed. I can't imagine anything outside of this year. But I had an experience, in terms of kind of drawing me out of my shell, or I guess more aligning the personal and the public in a sense. I had someone come up to me that was very upset about the friars and very upset about the Catholic Church, and more or less just took it out on me. And I'd never had that happen before. And I came into that scenario having had very positive interactions with patients and was kind of blindsided by this. And, I wouldn't wish for it to happen because it was very uncomfortable. I didn't know how to handle it. I just tried to listen as best I could, push back on things I thought weren't true, but make sure the person felt like I heard them as best I could. But reflecting on that, somewhat negative interaction later, I felt myself being drawn out to balance who I think I am and how I am in private with how I am in public. And I think often that means I'm not winning conversations or arguments as often, or I'm not feeling like I'm always nailing interactions and tasks and things. It's more about how do I consistently be the person I want to be, who God calls me to be, who I want to be as a friar. And I think wearing the habit, Tito, like you were saying, you're a better person when you wear it. I think that's true in a sense because it calls forth an authenticity. I think people can smell BS, and I don't want to be that.
So I want to transition a little bit to we've been talking about your conversion, your awakening, your whatever we want to call this experience of novitiate. What was it like before? Were you just a terrible person sitting left and right, lost in the wilderness? Who was the Jimmy of 3 years ago?
Well, the Jimmy 3 years ago was a little less lost than maybe the Jimmy 10 years ago.
Okay.
Okay.
But I think I've definitely spent a fair share in the wilderness. Um, but right before entering, I worked in higher education. So I worked for about 6 years at the University of San Diego, where I did my undergrad and grad school. I was there, well, I did all that schooling and then worked professionally at Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington, where I did, let's see, I worked in housing and residence life, and then I taught undergrad leadership course, an experiential leadership course. And then right before joining, I spent 2 years at Loyola University in Maryland, where I was a career counselor as my full-time role, and then helped with retreats and kind of some other things on campus. Um, so yeah, that was right before, and it's been funny. I've kind of spent uh, before joining, I did a giant loop of the country. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I went to college and grad school in San Diego,
Hmm.
Spokane, Washington, Baltimore, and then postulancy was back in D.C. So it has been, I
Nice.
joked that it took about 10 years to get back to where I started.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And so I'm curious. Are you interested in continuing with higher education? Did you feel as you kind of began to look into the friars and have discerned this life with us? Do you feel called to do something different? Where's that kind of taking you now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm open to different,
Hmm.
but I really enjoyed working with what I guess I would call emerging adults, like that 18 to 25
Yeah.
population. Even folks that were like late 20s who were alumni of the university, I would work with if they wanted to make a transition in terms of career or rethink what they wanted to do. Um, Besides just the very awesome energy that a college campus has, I found a lot of meaning in getting to talk with students about who do you want to be? What do you want to do? What's important to you? How do you figure that out? When I was at Loyola, so often students would come in so well versed in how to describe the job they wanted, but really, really unformed in terms of how to articulate what they liked, what they desired, what was important to them. And so there's almost this disconnect of like, I can see something and figure out how to articulate that job I want or that level of income I want, which aren't bad things. But if that is void of, well, what gives my life meaning, what's most important to me, then whatever that thing you go find out there is probably going to be unfulfilling at some point.
I think a lot of them, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just my experience of the college students, they see a job as simply something you do so that you can do what you really want. And a lot of them see it as kind of a drudgery. They see it as something you just got to do. It's just, oh, I'm gonna have to work, but I just want to be rich. And if you try to get beneath that, like, what do you really want? I don't know. I just want to be rich. And it's kind of sad. And you try to give them kind of a Catholic perspective of like your work can be very fulfilling, and work is not a punishment necessarily, but it's actually how you actualize yourself as a human being. You add something to the world. You find meaning in work. They don't like to hear that at all. And obviously not speaking for an entire generation, but it's much less common to find someone who has a passion for their work as something that provides for the world.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And like you, I also really enjoy working with people in that kind of age group. There's something very exciting, I think, where about working with a group of people who are entering into adulthood, who are almost fully formed adults, and but they're still figuring out who they are, and getting to walk with them along that journey is a really kind of exciting job or work to do. But yeah, something that you just said, Casey, reminds me of a group that I spoke to at my old high school. They were high school kids. They were in a young entrepreneurs club, and I was like, oh, I work at Siena, has a good business school. I'd like to talk to them, to the club about the business school, and it has a entrepreneurs program, and it became clear to me immediately all these kids were only really interested, not all of them, but a lot of the guys in that group were only really interested in getting rich. And they were like, well, so what kind of investments can you do? I'm like, well, and I was like, investing is only one small piece of business. It's not even the most stable, and I was like, there's, entrepreneurship, there's this, there's that. And they weren't interested in any of that. It was clear to me they're high schoolers, but I kind of looked at their faculty advisor, like, do better, bro, because these kids are focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah, so what do you do with people like that, Jimmy? How do you coach them?
Well, I mean, first you have to build a relationship with them. You got to find out, I mean, it sounds like in this scenario, they were luckily already in the room, which is, a huge win. I think a lot of folks that work on college campuses would consider that a major win. But I think it's often, so the first Franciscan I really met was a chaplain at the University of San Diego when I was in grad school. His name's Gino Correa. And he would joke all the time that, part of his ministry was intentional loitering, and,
I like that,
and you would loiter in places that perhaps students that don't normally come to, whether it's campus ministry or the counseling center or the, professional development center, the students that don't come there are somewhere. And so where can you go to build a relationship with them? And then beyond that, it's just continuing to develop that and ask them questions, I mean, that was a lot of what I did when I would meet with students, and whether it was in my office or around campus, just plant the seed, So what do you think about that? I would try to be a question asker, not a presenter, which is hard as an extrovert. I love to present. I just want to, put the show on, so to speak. But being a question asker, I think, often planted more seeds. And maybe a presenter to start getting to know one another, but asking questions and almost an encouragement or a challenge. Like if something came up that they expressed interest in, being like, you can do that, go do that. And if I ever did that, I made sure to go to the thing. If it was a club or an event or something that I was pushing them to go to, if I could go and support them, I'd try to. I mean, of course, that's not always practical.
Tito has talked about that a lot. I think it's so important.
Yep.
I would say it touches on what I think is a major part of my pedagogy, which comes from the movie Inception. I think it captured something really well, which is that you can't plant an idea in someone's head. They have to discover it themselves. And you can tell them something, but they'll always know it came from somewhere else. But if you can just give them a question and then they discover it, well, then now it's theirs. They have ownership of it. They grow in it. They love it. Questions are so powerful.
Yep. And oftentimes when I'm, back at Siena, I had a dry erase board, well, one in my office because I love those, but also one on my door. And I would put down, I can listen and I can advise. Tell me which one you want. Because it's a rule I came up with my sister years ago, where she would just get so annoyed with me because she would come to me with a problem. I'm like, well, just do this. And she's like, that's not why we're talking right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, fine. You tell me which one you want and I will do it. And now she comes to me for advice. But back then she was just like, I just need you to listen. And I think people need that a lot of times. And I think that's something that, I think friars are good at. Not that others aren't good at it, but, something about a lot of the friars a lot of people who are called to religious life with the friars is we listen and we're willing to encounter people. And I think you're right. That ability to ask questions is huge, even if it's a challenge for some of us.
I've heard this before, and then there's one other step, which is, do you want me to leave you alone? Leave you alone, fix your problem, or just listen, and just get it out of the way.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I'm happy to do any of them.
Yeah. I think there's probably many students that would have preferred I just walk away, but so it goes. Yeah, it really is, and it's just encouraging them to still be curious about things, and I also joked when I came into the order last year, part of our human development coursework, we talk about what we did before and how we got here, and I also had to own the fact that being a career counselor is a wonderful way to tell other people what they should do without having to deal with any of your own stuff.
Yeah, the worst people are career coaches, right? Or life coaches. They got
Right,
you
exactly.
can't do, might as well teach.
Right, yeah. My life is shambles, but I know exactly what you should be doing. You know,
Yep.
and yeah, I think part of doing the work with emerging adults or college age students is also being willing to do your own work, right? To be willing to see that. I had a student reach out to me, I think earlier this year, and she's making a move from kind of the area she grew up to a totally new area, taking a new job, all this stuff. And she was like, "Do you have any advice?" A dangerous question. And and my response, I it was interesting. I wouldn't have said this before formation or being part of the Friars, but I told her, I was like, "Look, the first 6 months are going to be straight up lonely. It's going to be tough, and it's not because you're doing anything wrong or the job isn't right or it's the wrong move, but it's just the transition. And I think if I hadn't have dug a little deeper in some of the reflection I've had to do the last year and a half, I don't know if I'd be as comfortable saying that, because there were moments in my transitions between jobs and locations where I was lonely and that was difficult.
Yeah.
And so I think, part of walking with people during that critical age is I don't know, being able to do both, be there for them, but also be willing to kind of look at your own crap and own it in a way that allows it not to get in the way of serving others.
Well, and that is such a key part of being a good preacher. Is there have been times where I've written a homily and it's all the right words. It sounds really nice, it feels really nice, but then you apply it to yourself and you realize, oh, this is hogwash. If someone preached this at me, I would get up and leave. And I think you got to run it through that final test. Does this mean anything to me? Does it come from a real place of lived experience? Or is it the nice things you're supposed to say? I'm sure it's the same with teaching. I'm sure it's the same with every walk of life. The best teachers are witnesses, the ones who live it themselves, who, as you say, are curious and are constantly learning rather than just teaching what they learned 20 years ago and they still have the same syllabus.
There's a comedian, Irish Catholic comedian, who he's gotten in trouble for things that he's in Ireland because they had no blasphemy laws, and so he doesn't really write out his sketches. Anyways, he just speaks off the top of his head, which has gotten him into trouble. But he talked about how much he likes going to mass in other countries, and his experience of going to mass in Australia, expecting it. Because Australia is this wild, rugged country, expecting the priest to be wild and rugged, and he expresses his disappointment in how superficial his experience of the mass is and the preaching, and the phrase that he uses is, "You couldn't hang your coat on that, let alone your soul." And I was like, "Oh, that's a good line. Like that's a really good barometer of, can someone hang their soul on what I'm sharing right now?" And I would like to say that I do better than I do, but I try really hard whenever I'm preparing for Mass and for a homily, that there's something there that someone can hang their soul on.
So what I'm taking from that is all Australian priests are terrible people. Is that the point of that story?
That is not what he said. Just this one priest.
No, that's great. Can I hang my soul on that? That's a great thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's a really good barometer.
So you're thinking, you did this before, you might think, I could do this again, but anything specific? You could be campus minister, you could be teacher. Are you thinking about ordination? Is that something you're thinking about going down, or you want to be a lay brother? Undecided?
I'm undecided. I'm truthfully undecided. I think I'm still thinking there. I think I'm open to both. I'm right now, the thing that I'm probably most fascinated about in terms of perhaps teaching or some form of teaching is, I think the more I learn about the Franciscan tradition and the charism and fraternity and minority as the two lungs that allow us to breathe as an order, I think there's something for the Franciscans to say about leadership models. And I'm not sure if I've found something out there yet that satisfies what I think I want to either read or see or talk about. Particularly when it comes to, I mean, we use the word fraternity, but others might, community might make more sense.
Hmm.
Um, but a communal learning, novitiate's about a communal discernment. I mean, it's an individual discernment, but there's also a communal discernment.
Sure.
And I think there's just something very important, maybe for the here and now of our world, that a Franciscan leadership model could say. So I'm kind of fascinated by that idea. I think it could lead to teaching or research or other things. Lord knows I don't want to, just stay at a desk my entire life. That's just not my
Yeah.
personality. Um, but I think there's something there. What I don't know what that would look like, but that's kind of, I'm open to ordination track, but I think in terms of maybe work, I'm very interested in something around that.
Well, that intrigues me because I love the idea of infusing the Franciscan charism in all walks of society. And I think particularly in leadership, in economics, in the way that we run this country, there's so much that we have to say. Please come up with something good and reform our systems.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think, there's been some stuff I've been reading recently in terms of how St. Francis viewed fraternity. And there's the reality that we're a larger group, but then there's the real importance of the one-to-one, and how the one-to-one operates in a group. And and I think sometimes we just choose either or.
Mm.
It's either like we have to be really good at one-to-one, and then we kind of lose track of a larger vision, or it's like everyone, has to be on board with what I want to do and just get in line. And so there's a phrase recently that I read, I'm forgetting where, but it talked about, Francis's spirituality really being horizontally ecstatic. It might have been Michael Blastic, but like a horizontal, ecstatic vision of how things are supposed to move forward. And so I'm very captivated by that.
He's a captivating guy.
Yep.
I mean, when you think about objectively how crazy the man was, and yet he was just so magnanimous. Of just everyone wanted to flock to him and they wanted to listen to him. And there was something that must have been affecting about him. I don't know if I would have joined him at the time, but man, I would have loved to have heard him preach, and I probably would have been moved by him.
I think
Yeah.
because the gospel can speak to all aspects of life. And because our Franciscan life is an interpretation of the gospel life, focusing on the eminence of God through Christ who was incarnate, it really, I think, is a perfect lens, especially nowadays, for looking at the world and asking, how do we inject God into it? How do we inject Christ back into it? Because that's what we are kind of imitating, right? We join the life that Francis started, while what he was trying to do was live out the gospel and imitating a humble God who became incarnate. It's God literally putting himself into the world, and all we have to do is ask, okay, how do we put God back in? How do we help God magnify God's presence in it, I suppose? And I think there's a lot of aspects, when it comes to politics, when it comes to government, when it comes to economics, there's a lot that we can speak to because of how closely tied our life is to the presence of God in the world.
So you got the whole world ahead of you. Different options there. How are you gonna bring Jesus to the world? Ultimately, our question, but there's so many different ways. We don't want to put you on the spot to determine the rest of your life. We were talking about it in our last episode. We don't like the idea of asking, not specifically you, but asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because it limits.
Yep.
It limits you to and pigeonholes you to just be a job rather than a person who's discovering, a person who's growing, a person who's living the gospel. I think that's the beauty of our charism, is that we're not teachers, we're not preachers, we're not missionaries. We have no specific job other than to live the gospel. And almost every person we talk to has multiple careers.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to talk to someone who doesn't have a Franciscan career yet, but everything is before you. Man, you might have 7 different careers. Who knows? And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. When I would talk with students specifically about career counseling, I would love to ask the question, what are you willing to settle for?
Mm.
You know, because it's a
That's an
very
interesting
kind
thing.
of like jarring question. It's like, well,
Yeah.
I don't want to settle. I'm gonna overachieve always. You're like,
Yeah,
trust
exactly.
me, you're definitely
I'm
gonna
him.
settle.
Yeah.
We always, yeah, I'm him. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
But I think
that's a good
yeah. But
question.
we all do, you know? I mean, that's the question of enough. What's enough?
Exactly.
And and um, I think learning how to be honest about that actually opens us up to the more, you know, because we're
Mm.
not trying to always fill the space like I do with my free time in Novitiate, you know.
Mm.
People really,
Yes.
you know, it,
Without that
it,
phone, what do you do?
right, right,
You have
you know.
recollection, brother. Recollection.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes, we've only got 72 palm trees on the property. That's what I heard. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I
but
mean,
yeah,
everyone wants to be Tom Brady, Michael Jordan. Everyone wants to be the best of the best, and it's great. Like, set your goals, go for what you want. Um, but if you're not, which you're likely not going to be, does that mean you're going to be disappointed? And you probably are, unless you have, I think, more reasonable goals. You say, what do you willing to settle for? But I think that's what you're asking: is what are some reasonable goals that will actually be a good defining life? I asked a student recently, he's thinking about priesthood, and I asked the both sides, what would convince you that this is what you should do? But then on the other side, what will convince you this is absolutely not what you should do?
Mm.
Because how are you going to discern if you don't know what the metric is, if you don't know what the guideposts are? I think you got to set those standards. Like, this is what I want
Absolutely.
to achieve in life that's reasonable. This is what will convince me that I've gone down the right path.
And there's
Without those, you're just kind of wondering.
and it makes me
yeah,
think of one of my favorite books, Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton, which has now come up twice this week. But you know, he emphasizes in that book, one of the things that he emphasizes is saying yes to one thing means saying no to other things. You know, it kind of gets back to that sense of what are you willing to settle on, because you can't do all things. You just can't. You know, I know that in high school, these kids they're interested in lots of different things. I want to be in the theater, or I want to be playing sports. I can do both, but they will eventually realize they can't do everything that they want to do, and so they'll have to say no to some things. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, G.K. Chester, you know, going back to his quote, one of the things that he says is wanting to be able to do all things is like wanting to get into heaven through multiple gates at the same time. You're still getting to heaven. Just pick one gate.
I like that.
Yeah.
And do something well. It's like
Yeah.
the prayer in honor of Oscar Romero, Prophets of a Future Not Our Own. We can't do everything, but we can do something. And there's a liberation in that we can do that thing well.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it really pushes you back to the question of who do you want to be? You know, it's if because you can't do everything. And so it's like you're almost pushed back into this, okay, well what are the values? What's my faith? What's my belief system that's guiding me through what to choose?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, there are certain things we do because we're good at them. There's other things we do because we're asked to do them, you know. But I think in 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 wrestling with that question as you move forward, you know, what should I be doing and who do I want to be? It should allow you to do things well, but also then get to a generative point also and allow that to give back to others in a way that isn't limiting, you know. Um, I don't know if that
And it
really
has a
makes
sense
sense,
of
but that's kind of
vocation.
how I think. Yeah,
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 it's a bigger thing. So I was talking with a student recently. Don't if you think about priesthood or you're thinking about getting married, great. Both of them are wonderful options. You will never find that one's a bad option.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like it's going to become all clear that, oh, I know for sure because I hate that. No, you love them both. But don't get married because of a girl. Get married because you feel called to marriage. And obviously you found a girl to do that with. But I think sometimes you might just find one person that comes to your life and like, man, I really like this person, therefore I'll get married. You're always going to find someone you like, and you're going to find the priesthood things that you like. Choose it based on some higher calling, a higher sense of purpose, a higher sense of, as you're saying, a generative thing that this will bring life to me and to other people.
Yep.
Otherwise, I think you're just taking the shiny object right in front of you.
yeah, Yeah, and it's not an efficiency thing either. I think sometimes we can nowadays it's like, how do I optimize my path? Or how do I make this the most
Yeah.
efficient use of my time? And
Yeah.
it's
You
kind
got to
of like
specialize
that's
in everything.
right. And it's like that's not really how it works,
Hmm.
It's
Mm.
just I mean, perhaps some things, right? I mean, I don't, I don't want to be on email all day or there's certain tasks that
Yes.
you make more efficient, but sometimes that's making things overly efficient or trying to optimize something gets in the way of actually discerning or
Yeah.
gets in the way of actually discovering you know
Or actually enjoying,
yeah
right?
yeah
Like
yeah
sometimes you're only worried about getting the best result and you just get it done as quickly as possible. Like,
Hmm.
well, I don't remember eating that. I ate just the optimal number of things. I went through my workout, I played the game, and I won. I don't remember doing it because I did it perfectly. Like, what's the point?
yeah yeah I've one of the things I've picked up this year in my free time is pottery. I've become
Oh,
an
interesting.
amazingly amateur potter, so I now make really
Is there any other type of amateur?
Yes.
just awful mugs for family and friends. Um, but it's been fascinating learning and watching videos about, potters that have philosophy. There's obviously a strong biblical connection to pottery.
Hmm.
Mm.
And but one of the things there's an American potter who's since passed away named Warren McKenzie, and he talks about how, a perfect cup isn't interesting. You know, this
Mm.
this this vessel that is without flaws is not interesting. There's nothing to discover. There's
Hmm.
nothing unique about it. There's nothing that you suddenly grow to like about it other than it's pristine.
Mm.
And he
Interesting.
talks
Yeah.
about how those usually sit in the cabinet and collect dust, whereas the imperfect ones with thumbprints and uneven rims and things like that are the ones you grow to love. And so I think it's true of how we discover what we're meant to do in this life, what God calls us to do. It's not to be this perfect thing to figure it out, exactly how it should be, but it's kind of to learn to love your issues or your flaws and allow that to still be a grace-filled way of living life.
Well, I
How
can't.
very Franciscan
Yeah,
and Skoden of you.
and I can't wait to have an imperfect mug in my hands so I can drink coffee out of it.
If you'd like one, I can send one. Just know that it'll be deeply unperfect. Maybe there might not be anything to discover.
I like
Oh,
weird.
he really oversold the amazingly amateur.
Yeah, I don't know if I can express this strongly enough. They're bad, okay? But you can have one.
I would love one. Oh man, I think there's something also very meditative about the process of making something, especially something like that. I've never
You know
made.
something about that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've never made pottery, but during the novitiate, I spent all of my free time in the wood shop, and one of my first projects was I found a big stick. It was nice and seasoned naturally, and it made for a great walking stick. And I etched designs into it, and I tried different things. And Norbert, who was our guardian, encouraged me, and I did a bunch of different stuff. And I look back at that stick now. I'm like, this is terrible. I was so proud of that stick.
Yeah. And now you're embarrassed by it. What was I thinking?
It has been used in school plays. Let me just say that. Because it has
But what a beautiful thing, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I do the same thing. I don't have a great analogy like you two. I don't really have a craft. I guess making videos, and certainly going back and looking at them. I think writing papers, you can go back and you look at like, man, that's embarrassing. But you wouldn't be who you are today if you weren't for those lessons. And even without that, there's something beautiful about the early ones. It does have those fingerprints because you did pour yourself into it. It may not be who you are today, but it was the representation of who you were then. And that person is great. And sometimes we can really easily dismiss our past selves and say, oh, thank God I'm not like that guy. But you were pretty happy to be that guy at one point, and God was always happy for that guy. So I think giving ourselves some slack sometimes with our pottery or woodworking or videos, that's great. They're beautiful expressions.
Yeah, yeah. And that's great. Yeah, God loved that guy at that moment when in the future you look back and go, oh, that's cringe. Oh,
Yeah, that's
you know?
right.
It's like, and you get that feeling of like, oh, turn it off. I don't want to.
Oh, I
But
get
yeah,
it.
Yeah, but that's so true, and it's actually that's probably one of the most comforting things is that I'm judging myself that way in a way that God never did in that moment.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
God loved me into moving forward,
Hmm.
and I mean, that's to me that's trying to emulate that when you work with other people. When I work with college students, I mean, that's what it's about. You try to catch them at moments where you see a truth or you see a breakthrough, even if it's tiny, and you just try to fan the flame,
Hmm.
you know, when
Yeah.
everything else can seem like, oh, this isn't going to work or this is naive or, you know, I'm sure at one point making videos you were like, I don't know about this anymore, but the the
Yeah.
flame got fanned and you kept going.
Well, I mean, those first couple of videos, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever made in my life, right? Because I
Yeah,
didn't know any better.
Right.
And then,
like
like
my
2 weeks
cups.
later, you
Yeah,
start to learn stuff. Yeah, exactly. I was amazingly amateur. Yeah, but
yeah,
we all are. I mean,
Hmm.
I think it gets back to that curiosity. If you ever get to the point where you think, I've made it, there's nothing left to learn, you might as well quit.
Hmm.
Because I think
yeah,
you've lost the passion for it. You've
yeah.
lost God in some ways because you're finished. You have what you want, but God is a mystery that's always unfolding.
Yep.
Mhm.
Well, brother, we pray for you in your novitiate.
Definitely.
How many months left? Do you know the minutes?
Uh, what's the seconds again? No, it's July 2nd. So whatever that
July
Okay.
is.
2nd.
I'm
Okay.
horrible with numbers, so there it is. Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
but not too
July 2nd. We'll
far.
be praying for you up until then, and towards then, it's a good date. Tito and I will be moving around that time.
We will be moving
Um,
around that time.
we
That's
haven't
true.
been able to tell people where we're going or what we're doing yet, but we keep giving little hints in every episode to hopefully
Hmm.
pique people's interest. But we will be around that time going to a new place, and maybe you'll be on vacation. You can come visit us.
That'd be nice.
You can live
I would
up to
love
the
that.
you can live up to the OFM initials, the Order of Furniture Movers, and help us move.
Yes.
I don't have a truck. I just want you to know.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
Just don't live up to the order of fat men. Yeah, that's not for everyone.
That's where
Stay
I
fit.
Got to move some furniture.
am. I will.
Well, don't rush through it. We joke about it, but it really is a grace time. It's an
It is.
opportunity to step back, enjoy every moment of counting those trees and being bored and entering into the mystery of God because you will, a couple of years from now, really long for it. Enjoy every moment you got.
Enjoy the stillness of it.
Yeah. Thank you guys. I'll do my best. It was good talking with you.
You too.
Use. Peace. Tito, do you want to go back to novitiate?
Can we take the evaluations out of it?
Can we just do a year-long retreat?
Yeah, that's because that I would do. That's one thing that I miss. We gave up personal computers, cell phones, and what I miss is the stillness. By the end of that year, we had regular meditation. I was able to sit in meditation for an hour, no problem. Now I meditate for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
and it's either before prayer, after prayer, and I even the 15 minutes sometimes can be a stretch. So I would really like to get back to that discipline of stillness.
Yeah, I would say the structure is one thing. I'm not sure if I want to go back to Wisconsin in the snows in the farmland for a year, but what I kind of miss and what I heard from this conversation a lot is that sense of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
It was new,
Yeah.
and hearing Francis for the first time and
Yep.
finding out about the church for the first time. And, I'm still growing, obviously. But I think there are times where I'm a little stagnant and like, I already did that. I read the sources. I know who Francis is.
Yep.
But to go back to that moment of where I was probably the most humble because I realized, oh gosh, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
That was me at my best. And so I think I can recapture that, but I really have to remind myself to kind of have a novitiate in the world, to really step back every morning in prayer, every day before I go to Mass, say, hey, there's so much more to learn at this place.
Yeah, I think that's the appeal of React channels. It's
Yes.
like seriously, like you get to watch someone discover something for the first time, and it reminds you of your own first time. And
Yeah.
maybe we should do a novitiate React channel. We'll just set up cameras all over the novitiate, and we watch and we react to them.
Hey, you joke. About 5 years ago, I approached the novice master because I wanted to do a documentary on the novices.
Yeah.
And he rightly said no. But I thought that would have been fascinating. Just like follow them throughout the year, ask them questions, see how they grew. He did not want a reality show filmed in his novitiate.
I don't blame him, but I also agree with you. It's a good idea.
It would have been great for vocations. It would have been great for publicity. I don't know. But
yeah.
Anyway, Francis, our Holy Father, he said that he wanted to be so minor that he would follow even the orders of a novice. And I think that's something that we can all take with us.
It is.
Jimmy is the most minor of our minors so far, not only in age, but someone new to this life. And I think it's really helpful for us to remember those minor characters,
Yep.
the effect he's already had on people's lives, the effects he will have. Not a main character syndrome, but just that humility going through life and trying to be a help to others. That's what I really take from this conversation in our lives as friars.
I agree.
So it's encouraging.
Absolutely.
So, brothers and sisters out there, be minor characters. Give up that main character syndrome. I'll see you next week.